Mr. Wesley, will you please take roll?
Chairwoman Schlossman, Member Geyer,
Here.
Member Amrian Beardsley, Member Bachna,
Here.
Member Haladina,
Here.
Member Hovanich,
Here.
Member Jordan,
Here.
and ADE representative.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Just be aware that we will lose quorum at 5 o'clock. So this committee will have to have a robust discussion in a timed manner here today. So we do want to get to the critical recommendations to the State Board. Director Williams, are there any public comments pertaining to agenda item number 1?
Vice Chair Geyer, members, typically board staff would recommend that if there are any public comments prior to an action being taken by a committee, that we hear those prior to the action. However, Vice Chair Geyer, we have not received any public comments, so I would suggest that you move ahead with item 1.
Okay, thank you, Director Williams. So we'd like to call the agenda item number 1 for the committee to discuss. This item is presentation, discussion, and recommendation, potential recommendation to the State Board of Education on the methodology of a single letter grade for schools with non-typical school configurations. So moving to that, we can begin to look at the options that we work to develop together.
Vice Chair Geyer, members of the committee, I believe that you yourself, Vice Chair Geyer, and Member Jordan have prepared information for the committee's consideration, and I would suggest that you present those findings to the committee and then open it up to discussion for the committee members.
Okay, thank you. Director Williams?
You're very welcome.
And I'll lead this off. You can see on the overhead presentation here some work that I did regarding reviewing the options for schools with unique grade configurations. There were actually 5 main options that were on the table for this review. I'm going to be considering 4 of them today, option 2, 3, 4, and then option 5, which is a combination of the different options. So option number 2 was to merge the outlier grades into one model. And by definition, this is to use existing K-8 and 9-12 models and place the outlier grades into one of the 2 models. I just note here, and again, this is basically sort of recapping some of the main information presented in the original PowerPoint provided by the board, the unique school configurations PowerPoint that includes the different options that are on the table here. So for this particular option, option number 2, you can see that it's best suited for when there are actually outlier grades or schools that have grade configurations in which a couple or a few of the grades don't really fit in with the overall school model or school system. And under this framework, you can see that I note that schools that do not include grade 12 adopt the K-8 model. Schools that include grade 12 but begin with the 4th or 5th grade. Note the 4th or 5th, we're going to get to that later. The actual boundary here is up to discussion and review. Or higher adopt the 9-12 model. And then schools with a different configuration of, say, K1, 2, 3, 4 to 12 use both models. So that's the sort of outlier merge approach. Option 3 would be to average 2 letter grades together. This is literally just taking the 2 scores or 2 grades for the 2 different models and literally just taking the average of the 2. One of the limitations of this approach is that it does not take into account student enrollment. So a school could, for example, have 50 students in K-8 and 1,000 in 9-12, and the average approach would literally just take the average, ignoring the fact that the 9-12 has 1,000 students and the K-8 has 50. I do provide here some information from the actual data for this year. You can see that on the screen. Just sort of looking at how many students on average were enrolled at each of the different schools based on the configurations that were used in the model. This is just to give you a sense of, yes, 12 and 6 to 12 schools are predominantly more focused on the high school grades, more of the students are in grades 9 to 12, as you would expect. Grade 5 to 12 is sort of in the middle. And then looking at K to 12, you can see that most of the students in that framework are actually, as you again would expect based on the fact that there are 9 grades here, in the grades K to 8. Note that I did not include any of the other configurations due to sensitivity of including an average for 2 schools or something, because then you could theoretically reverse engineer another school's student count. So again, you can see that that provides evidence or some potential concerns for option 3, the fact that these different configurations do indeed tilt in terms of the student counts as you would expect them to. Option 4 is to prorate the 2 letter grades, which is to, and I know member Jordan has done more work on in terms of the actual reporting for this one, in terms of looking at the actual counts, to use the data as is and prorate the letter grades based on the full academic year enrollment numbers. This is sort of a weighted approach. I'm not going to get into the details on the weighting. It's detailed elsewhere in the PowerPoint. It details how you would go about calculating this. This option is superior in the fact that it does in fact take into account enrollment. That dummy example earlier with the 50 to 1,000, you would weight the 1,000 enrollment school more heavily, considerably more heavily than the 50. It's still limited in that it can account for schools that, 1, exclude grade 12, and note I say exclude grade 12, meaning that the school by design does not include graduating students. We'll get to it later on the question of schools that will eventually have graduating students. So those schools that exclude grade 12 will miss graduation rate and college career readiness points. It also can't account for schools that have too few K to 8 grades to obtain all of the acceleration or readiness points that they would otherwise get. Again, considering the comparing option 4 and option 3, based on the fact that it is more fair and takes into account the enrollment, option 4 is better than option 3 in the sense that it does account for enrollment and it is less sensitive to, say, a school that has just a small number of grades in the other model. However, both option 2, option 3, and option 4 all have drawbacks. So what I tried to do was sort of try and bridge those drawbacks together by merging option 2 with option 4 in a manner in which we sort of improve the fairness of both and also correspondingly reducing the cons of both. And this would be to adopt the idea of, for schools that have outlier grades, use the idea of merging those grade configurations into the most appropriate configuration model. For schools that have, that would be option, or sort of point A and point B on the screen there. For C there, you can see that schools that start with grades K1, 2, 3, and maybe 4 to 12, we would actually have to use the models K to 8 and 9 to 12, and then some sort of proration would need to occur between those two. Because otherwise you're going to have the same problem with a school that's predominantly including, say, 9 to 12 or K to 8 students. And then I get in, again, this is just an idea, this is just an option, sort of a way of trying to reduce the sort of limitations of both 2 and 4. And I do realize and do want to make it clear that none of this is final, none of this is concrete, and this is just, again, based on the evidence that I was able to see, the least worst solution for the challenge of trying to deal with these unique school or grade configurations. Again, least worst, or the best, in other words. But nothing is perfect, so this will have its own drawbacks as well. And there's some more information here about, and I just included this as sort of an FYI or just as additional information, how you might think about scoring a K to 12 school under this approach. That's getting further down the road than we can go today. So that's there's some additional information in this handout regarding schools that received an NR That's not really directly pertaining to this particular question of dealing with unique configurations, because under that scenario, you would need to use additional modeling that goes beyond this limitation. So we'll keep that for another discussion. Director Williams?
Vice Chair Guyer, would you like Member Jordan to present his information, or would you like to take questions based on yours? I would suggest that Member Jordan present his, and then questions can be directed
please,
to both of you.
Member Jordan. Yeah, you can present yours.
All right. What I did to begin with was to provide a little bit of background, kind of get some ideas to what these schools look like, and in this particular chart that I put together initially is to show the distribution as to the letter grades that each of the schools have received, their grade configuration, and then the total number of schools in the various combinations all the way down. We see that a majority of our K-12 schools are 10 of them are regular public schools, the other 30 are charter schools, and then our next largest groups are the 612 and the 712 schools, which are primarily charter schools, although the 712 is pretty well balanced between public schools and charter schools. Just kind of give you an idea as to the distribution. We can go ahead and flip to the next one. And to further understand what we're looking at in terms of the schools, I broke it down by the number of schools served, grade levels served, and the percent of freedom to reduced lunch, as well as the grade levels, so that we see that distribution as well. One of my observations is that a lot of our number of our charter schools within this particular category don't report students on free or reduced lunch. I don't believe they have any students at all that participate in the federal lunch program. So therefore, that information is going to be, it's just not there. That's why we have the blank of the 46 schools not reporting that. And then getting into the actual options for each one, option 2. Which is probably the easiest of the ones to. I listed a number of bullet points of observation based on this, applying this option for 92 out of 108 of the schools. Some of the schools have very few students at 9 through 12. Others have very few students in the lower grades, if none at all. As Member Geyer mentioned, there are 33 schools that were not rated simply because their numbers were too small. That was part of it. I'm not sure some of the other reasons why they were not rated. Of the schools that are 312, 212, 112, and K-12, the number of students in K-8 are much more than, it's a larger number of students than in the 912, and that's to be expected because they're serving larger grade levels. Whereas in 612, 712, and 812, it could either be about the same or a little bit skewed more toward the middle school level. It just depends on how long the school has been in service. Naturally, the longer the school has been in service, the more balanced in terms of enrollment. So we can go ahead and look at this particular table, because all I did was just break it down as to the letter grades, and all I did right here was just take whichever letter grade was higher between the two, whether they were because each of these schools had a letter grade calculated for both K-8 as well as 912. And so whichever was higher, this would be the distribution as to the number of A schools, B schools, C schools, and of course the schools that would not have a letter grade. But in this particular model, knowing that we did have some schools who had a letter grade calculation for one particular, for say like K-8, they didn't have it. It was not reported for 912. So in this particular way, we get only 16 schools without letter grades as opposed to 33. And we can go ahead and go to the next.
Oh, 1 second. Vice Chair Geyer, Member Jordan, if I may ask a question. You stated within this You took the higher, so you took the higher of the two scores.
Yeah, just regardless of the higher of the two, because in taking a look at what the State Board of Education was asking, one option, when we look at it in option 2, one option was take whatever one is higher. Another one was take what other options might we consider also. And in another table, I just looked at what it would look like just for the 912.
Okay.
And I hope it's in this.
Thank you for that clarification.
Right here. Option 2, when appropriate, applying the 912 letter grades. And this is applying to the schools that would be, say, like a 612, a 712, that kind of combination, 512, and just using the 912 letter grade. This would be the distribution of grades. This is what it would look like. So this is pretty simplistic, pretty basic. And then the other two models, once we get it going, we can go ahead and go to option 3. Option 3 is that's just straight direct average, and this is all just taking the total points and averaging the two, and this would be the breakdown. And then my question here, if we take the average between the two, are we going to be applying the 912 cut points, or would we be applying the K8 cut points? And that's an unknown. And this particular chart is showing the distribution as to what it would look like. Across the bottom horizontally, that's what it would look like with the total 912 cuts in our distribution of letter grades. We would not have any F schools, but if we apply the K8 schools, we would have 6 F schools, and of course 33 not rated at all. Then we can go ahead and go to the next options. This is where it's weighted, and here I give you, this is a very simplistic weighting, and it's based on the enrollments, student enrollments at each of these schools. Other reference points that I used were the enrollment data that's available at the accountability website for ADE, also referring to the AC Merit MSAA data file that's available from the website, able to pull that down and see the number of students tested at each grade level as well as among all students. So that was I was able to use that information to apply this, to apply the weighting of the schools, meaning that, and it was based purely upon on the percentage of students who are in K8 among in relation to the entire student enrollment of the school. Likewise, enrollment of percentage of students enrolled in 912, and then applying the weighting appropriately, and then coming up with a score. And this would be the distribution of letter grades of those schools. Again, the question is, which cut scores would we use? We would use 912 or the K8, and that's why you see the table laid out as it is, so we can see the number of A schools, B schools, C schools in both models. In this particular model approach, we don't, applying the 912, we don't have any F schools. However, we had 7 F schools if we apply the K8 cut scores. And I didn't really look at option 5 so much because as I was reading option 2, they did talk about some variations, much of what Mr. Geyer was commenting about, to where a hybrid could be applied, depending on the configuration, what makes the most sense, what would be the most fair way of doing it. So.
Chairman Geyer, members of the committee, if any committee members have any questions for either Vice Chair Geyer or Member Jordan in regards to discussion, just a reminder that you need to have a recommendation at this meeting today of which model the State Board would vote on for Monday's meeting. So it's what I've heard from the conversation thus far, just between Vice Chair Geyer and Member Jordan, is that maybe option 3 is not the best option to choose, and it sounds as if we're between 2 and 4, whether it's 2 on its own or option 4 on its own, or a combination of 2 and 4 together. Would I be correct in that assumption?
Yes, based on the information today, yes.
Okay. And did any of the committee members have any questions or concerns in regard to this?
Member Geyer, could you explain the hybrid approach, the paragraph you have about schools that receive a prorated grade would receive a grade based on all K-8 and 9-12 schools? Are you proposing there's a K-12 model, or I'm misunderstanding what you're suggesting?
Again, that would be, if this approach were adopted, one of the then direct questions is, okay, we have this prorated set of school sort of proportions or percentages. How would we then, which K-8 or 9-12 model would be used to assign grades? And I was simply proposing that because we are essentially taking a weighted average of K-8 and 9-12, that we use all of the information from K-8 and 9-12 together to come up with sort of a grading or norming population for those. Again, this is just an idea. Definitely could see, definitely see other options on the table here. Because it isn't a weighted average, and you in theory would have most grades of both models represented, you do have a limitation with just using one or the other models because you're not representing those schools that are not included in that.
Vice Chair Geyer, members of the committee, if I may ask a question. Vice Chair Geyer, when you're speaking of option 5, the hybrid approach, when you see the business rule A, schools without grade 12 adopt the K-8 model and merge to a K-8, and I believe Member Jordan spoke that there were about 5 schools that did not have a grade 12.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and we can assume most likely that these schools are building in their grade 12, so within the next year there would be.
Right. There's one of the schools definitely that I saw listed they have their first graduating class will be this year. I think one of the other schools may have a graduating class this year. Another one will have one probably in about 2 years. So they're fairly new schools, and so they're adding a grade level each year.
And Vice Chair Geyer and committee members, for business rule B under the hybrid approach, schools that include grade 12 but begin with the 5th grade or higher adopt the 9-12 model. Was there any indication that those schools were actually going lower within the grades? So they were, instead of building on top of their grades, they were building below their grades. So maybe next year they would add a 4th grade, and the following year they add a 3rd grade.
I don't know of any of the schools that are doing that. The schools that I saw listed, those that are 612, they're going to remain 612 schools. That's not going to change because they're schools with a classic college preparatory type of program. Even looking at the AZ merit results that are available from the ADE for those particular schools, about 90% of their students take the algebra 1 into course assessment in 8th grade as opposed to the regular grade 8 assessment. So to me, that's a little bit different design of a school, and the kids are more on a high school track at that point. So when I begin to consider option 2 or option 5, either one of those, knowing the configurations of those particular schools, even the 712 schools can be included in that. It seems logical to me to apply the 912 model to those particular schools, just simply because of the configuration of the grade levels as well as the content that the kids are seeing.
Thank you,
Director Williams and Member Jordan. One additional thing here. It does say 5th grade, however, again, I received Member Jordan's work after drafting this, and I do believe that 4th grade to 12 is definitely on the table as a considerable replacement of 5th to 12, making it 4 to 12. That way this is less sensitive to a school, say, shifting down a grade than having their model flip on them. Again, it is up for discussion which is best, because what I was trying to do with the 5 to 8 and then 9 to 12 is that make the balance between the K to 8 grades and 9 to 12 grades equal. So 4 grades in each be the decision. But again, I'm definitely willing to consider the 4 to 8 and 9 to 12.
Vice Chair Geyer, I wonder if Member Jovanovic has any comments on the phone.
Just a question. One of the things that I don't see on here is how did the distribution change when we went to the prorated, and how did the distribution change when we went to outlier grades? So just curious as to what the shift was to know what the likely impact was. And then how many schools that had a K-8 grade and a 9-12 grade had adjacent grades? So if we were to do a type of prorated average, knowing that we weren't going to do pluses or minus, how different would that look than just assigning the grade of the bigger school?
That's a pretty good question, because part of what I did in looking through the data and kind of analyzing it, in the tool that I was using, I was able to toggle back and forth and actually see some of that myself, and as well as see, I think if we were to go back to one of the first tables that I have on my table set, let's see, let's go back to when I start showing the letter grade distribution, because I think I can explain this a little bit. Here we go. We'll start right here. This is using whichever is higher, option 2. I don't know if you're looking at that, whichever is higher, K-8 or 9-12. In this particular view,
Can you
we
just
have...
tell me which table?
Yeah, it's the table number 4, I believe. Yeah, table.
Okay.
Yep. And this one here is just whichever grade is higher. And in this particular layout, applying the 9-12 model, of course, we would have 27 A's, 32 B's, 21 C's, and so forth. And then applying the, that's all I did. I just kept the letter grades as they were. It's not applying the K-8 model. It's just whatever the letter grade happened to be, and that's the distribution. We would still have 4S, but we'd have 27 A's. Now, as we head on down to option 4, and this is actually a pretty good example. Option 4, when we begin to prorate it, then we see a significant change, because we see a reduction as to the number of schools that are A's in both K-8 model as well as applying the 9-12 model. We do see a little bit of an increase in the F's, and the distribution kind of gets skewed a little bit lower than in before. So applying the weighted, the prorated, it does impact schools' letter grades. Say, for example, you do have, well, in all these cases, most of them have the same letter grade, but we do have some in which the 9-12 have a higher grade than the K-8, or vice versa. So when you begin to prorate that, it does impact the letter grade somewhat for some of the schools.
So you had said for option 4 that there were more F schools. I'm not seeing F schools weighted in option 4. It just shows A through D in blank.
Right. Well, if you take a look at it, if we apply the K-8 cut scores, A, B, C, D, F, down the left side and looking from left to right all the way to the total, and you're right. That's no, that's actually... yeah, it shows up as a D for the high school, but those 7 schools, you see that you have a total of 13 if we apply the 9-12 model. However, if you apply the K-8 model, that 7 is going to be at an F. So over on the far right.
So it basically looks like all it does is kind of bring schools more towards the mean, or just that's what I'm trying to figure out from this. Our schools are graded if you're taking one or the other. So it's looking at total number of schools here should be smaller than total number of schools that are earning a K-8 and a 9-12 grade now. So looking at the percent distribution of those, and how does that shift?
Right, and once again, the tool that I was using, I was able to toggle between percent and actual number. In actual number, we can take a look at this and see that it's a more balanced distribution of letter grades on the 9-12, looking across the bottom. even on the applying the K-8 cut score in the far right-hand corner, where you have 17, 20, 19, and 10, and then 7. And then, of course, you would have, in this particular case, applying the K-8 model, you would have 35 schools without a grade.
So why would we drop 33 schools without using the K-8 model?
It doesn't really. These are schools that when you the schools that are not rated, they don't have any points tallied for them, so I can't average them together. I can't average values that are not there. And in the data set that we were given, those values were not there. It just comes up as a blank. And of the schools where they do have a score for, say, like the K-8, but not the 912, that's where we end up in this particular situation and doing a prorate. It can't be calculated, so it's going to have to take the K-8 score or the 912 score, whichever score the school has.
Vice Chair Guyer, Member Jordan, to further her question a little bit farther, some of these schools that had non-typical grade configurations, if they were graded under the K-8 model and received a preliminary letter grade, but in the 912 they received an NR, it was most likely because they didn't meet the necessary N counts in order for them to get a grade at the 912. So when Member Jordan talks about how he has an NR, in regard to a K-12 or whatnot, it's most likely because the certain grade level didn't meet the N numbers for him to run the data with, and the data wasn't provided because the school doesn't have the N count.
That's correct. When you look at the data file and you begin to look at the specific schools where there is an NR, and you run your calculation, and you come up with a blank or no value. It's you look at where you're pulling from. It's for that particular school. There's no data there, so nothing's calculated. And that's correct, and it's probably because the N counts are so small that it doesn't get calculated. One of my observations of the data that we had is that. This is really more specific to the acceleration readiness. I'm kind of bird walking here a little bit, but this might help us understand that all the schools that had an N count of 20 or less in terms of percent within the accelerated readiness for each one of those various categories, it had a value of 0. It's as though in the coding that if it identified an N count of 20 or less, it didn't even bother to calculate it. It just populated as 0%. So naturally, as it gets calculated for the overall score that's needed for the letter grade, it's going to probably yield a 0 or some other type of value that's used as a null.
Thank you, Member Jordan.
Director Williams and Member Jordan, I just wanted to note that I did do a sort of detailed walkthrough of all the NR ratings for the unique school configurations, the different combinations therein, just to sort of look at what the sort of enrollments were and try and get a better sense of what was happening with them. So that definitely kind of paints a picture of, for instance, schools missing both ratings just generally did not have very many full academic year students, period. So they just didn't even have close to enough data to do any ratings. So you can see that on the third page of my summary, if that helps. Just.
And so, too, then, by combining them, it would seem reasonable that we would be adding additional schools, those that didn't meet the N size for K-8 or for 912, which now, if we combine them together, would they be able to meet the N size?
So if you combine the counts for each, that would require sort of a like mixed model where you use the K-8 and 9-12 model together, which is not something we're proposing doing. So in order to combine the ends, you would have to run both models simultaneously, which is not something attempted yet. So.
Member Hovanich, do you have any other further questions?
None at this time. I just think that given the limited nature of the data, it's going to be hard to make a strong recommendation without knowing the full impact of what the distributions are going to look like and what the right policy will be. I think my big concern at this point is if we are really focused on grading as many schools as we can, and we're having the end size conversation too, looking at a model where you have not rated K-8 schools and not rated 9-12 schools, if combined, would meet the minimum end size would be another consideration. But that just confounds this question much further than we're going to be able to explore it, I think, at this point. But that would be one of my add-on recommendations is if we are giving a single grade to a K-11 school or K-12 school, then we would look at it in the use of data that the look is across all state students in those grades, not just do they have 20 K-8 kids and 20 9-12 kids.
Member Geyer and Member Ivanovich, that's pretty much what I was attempting to do in putting together the tables to try to get some idea as to what the impact might be depending on which particular option the state board would go with for schools that have an A and a C. How does that impact the school as a whole? Do they end up with a B? Do they end up with a C? Do they get to retain an A? And then beyond that, as we begin to consolidate or identify a school that, like these that we're discussing, whether it's a K-12, 7-12, doesn't matter, which particular, as we use an option 4 or an option 3, which cut scores do we use for that school? Do we use the 9-12 or do we use the K-8? That becomes another dilemma because we do see some definitive differences in the school letter grade depending on which model we use for the average, whether they're prorated or a straight average, how that might impact the schools and the overall distribution as the letter grades.
Right, and I understand that, and I think the explanations that you provided here make a lot of sense. What I think I'm making the point of is given the data limitations and the fact that we still have 33 schools that do not get a grade even under option 4 because one of them was a not reported grade, getting more of that information from the department to know, 33 additional schools that have 20 students in them is going to probably significantly impact the distribution or not, but we don't necessarily know that. So I think that was my concern, is not the work that you've done, but the data that's available for us to be able to make a sound recommendation on how this will actually operationalize when the department does it in the field.
And I agree with you. That's my concern too, is the 33 schools. If we go back to option 2 and we apply the option 2, because we know of those 33 schools, I think I had 16 of them that are not rated for either one of the models. So now that out of those 33 schools, we have 17 of those schools that actually have a letter grade at either using the K-8 model or this 9-12. So that's where option 2 is of value, especially if we were to use it as kind of like within the option 5 that Member Geyer discussed in terms of a hybrid. Now we only have 16 schools with letter grades, without letter grades.
Right, and then that's my further question of those 16 schools that don't have a letter grade because they don't have 20 for K-8 or 20 for K-12 combined, or 9-12 combined, do they have 20 kids K-12? So that's the other kind of piece to it as well.
And Vice Chair Geyer, members of the committee, when we start talk about what you were speaking of, Member Hovanich, in regard to do we have a system that is a K-12 system that would unify or would use all of the students in a K-12 school to ensure that they meet the end count? Those conversations have occurred at the state level, and we are aware that is an issue that would need to be addressed. But I think for right now, in the purposes of this committee, we know that there are going to be schools that are going to continue to be and are not rated. We really just have to make a decision, the best decision possible now to take to the board, and then know that this committee will continue to model that option for the board. I would suspect that we present a recommendation to the board December 4th, and then we could model and run the preliminary grades for those schools, since they have yet to have a preliminary grade for them. And then we can always bring that back to the board at the January meeting. Now, it also calls into question, depending on which option this committee chooses, the setting of cut scores, which is a board policy discussion. So if we choose an option in which cut scores would need to be set, then the board would have to set those cut scores at the January meeting. So, but I just want committee members to be aware of the time, which is now 4:45, and Member Hovanich has to leave at 5. So, were there any other committee members, Member Haladina or Member Bachna, any other questions or comments in regards to these unique options for school letter grades?
Just that I think from what I reviewed from when this went to the board, I think in May, they were open to taking the higher of the 2 grades for those schools, and I think that was what they initially decided if we decide to go that route. From my perspective, that might be the most equitable, considering that reduces the number of schools without letter grades, as well as gets away from the data issues and quality issues and the end counts that haven't been addressed yet.
Member Geyer, do you have any further comments or questions for the committee?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Member Jordan?
I find myself keep gravitating back to option 2 based on what you're saying. Member Bachner. But then again, with what Member Geyer presented in terms of doing a hybrid with what he presented under option 5, there is some value to that, I think, as well. So that's where I'm at between one of those two.
So Member Geyer and members of the committee, if someone wants to form a motion, it seems like some of you agree with option 2 and put it to a vote. If you want to move towards option 5, a hybrid approach, you're more than welcome to do that. But we need a motion, and we need to get a roll call vote so we can determine if we have a recommendation to the state board for Monday.
I move to go with option 2, giving the highest of the letter grades.
Vice Chair Geyer, the next step would be, is there a second?
Is there a second?
I'll go ahead and second that.
Is there discussion?
This is Christy. I will not be voting to support the motion going forward to the board. I do not think taking the highest of the 2 letter grades is the right approach and is the most representative of the school's performance. Even if we have schools that meet the minimum N size, the disproportionate sizes could cause a lot of perverse incentives for schools to create more hybrid models just to get a higher of a 2 letter grade. So I do not support the option of awarding the highest of 2 letter grades.
Thank you, Member Hovanich. Just as a side comment, so the committee members are aware, Member Hovanich just provided stating that she would not vote for this. So board staff would take that, and we will provide that to the board as well, because the board did ask for any other opinion that would be descending from a TAC vote. So thank you for explaining that for board staff. Vice Chair Geyer, the next would be ask for further discussion.
Yeah, any further discussion regarding option 2, which is defined as taking the higher of the 2 grades?
Okay. Vice Chair Geyer, if Mr. Wesley can take a roll call vote.
Can I clarify, what are the votes? Yes, no, and maybe so?
So Mr. Wesley will call your name, and if you would like to vote for the motion, which is the Technical Advisory Committee would recommend option 2 to the State Board of Education, as a methodology of a single letter grade for schools with non-typical school configurations, right? We just make sure it's all one sentence. Option 2 is what Ms. Bachna recommended in the motion, seconded by Member Jordan. Mm-hmm. So then you would say yes, or you would say no. And if you say no, I would recommend that you give a dissenting opinion so that that can be given to the board.
There's no third vote, like no opinion?
Member Haladina, I would, since all committee members received the information, I would highly suggest that committee members voted either in favor or not in favor. However, if you wish to abstain from the vote, you are more than welcome to do that. Mm-hmm. I can't prohibit a member from abstaining from a vote.
Okay.
Member Hovanich?
No.
Member Bachna?
Yes.
Member Jordan?
Yes.
Member Geyer?
It's like being torn. I'm going to abstain.
Member Haladina?
No.
So 2-2.
So we have 2 noes, 2 yeses, and 1 abstention, which means the motion fails. So we would need another motion. Or at this point, your other option is the State Board of Education has asked for a recommendation on these non-typical grade configurations. What we could potentially do is take 2 options and take it to the board. And you can explain both options to the board members. Now, I've already spoken with Vice Chair Geyer and Member Jordan, and both have agreed that they can present the data piece of this to the board at Monday's meeting. But the State Board of Education is expecting a recommendation from this committee on which way to go. So if you are torn between 2 options, because one obviously is just giving the higher of the 2 grades for K-8 and 9-12, whereas another model breaks it down a little bit further. In either regard, I need a motion.
So I would move that we would look at the hybrid approach as our recommendation, where schools without a grade 12 adopt the K-8 model. Schools that include a grade 12 go with the 9-12 model, and we can decide if that's the 4th or 5th grade. And then with the hybrid approach, that we would need more information from the Arizona Department on how to prorate the K-8 and 9-12, given the fact that there are limited or no grades for a number of the schools because of N size requirements, and then a way to include all schools that are K-12 that have a minimum N of 20, not requiring a minimum N of 20 for K-8 and 9-12. So it's a super long motion, but essentially looking at the hybrid approach with more investigation into C before they approve the method.
Any second to that motion? I second. Yeah. Any comments regarding that?
No, I can live with taking a look at the hybrid, especially if it's going to take into consideration the attributes of option 2 as well as it's integrated within option 5. I think that's a reasonable way. It's a reasonable approach.
Member Wesley, will you, or member, Mr. Wesley, will you call the vote, please?
Member Hovanich?
Yes.
Member Bachna?
Yes.
Member Jordan?
Yes.
Member Geyer?
Yes.
Member Haladina?
No.
4-1.
Okay, with a vote of 4-1, board staff will move the tax recommendation to the State Board of Education for the December 4th meeting. We will take your recommendation. We will re-listen to the audio to make sure that we include everything that Member Hovanich spoke to in her motion, and then Member Geyer or Vice Chair Geyer and Member Jordan, you will be presenting at the December 4th meeting in regards to that hybrid model. So moving on, looks like we have 6 minutes. So let's try to get as much done if we can, Vice Chair Geyer. I know that there was a presentation discussion for item 2 regarding student number count issues within the A through F accountability plan and business rules. Member Schlesman is not here for this. The other thing that we could do is we could table the remaining items and attempt to have another meeting this week prior. I just don't know what everyone's schedule would be. So, Vice Chair Geyer,
I just want to let you know I'm unavailable the rest of this week and Monday and Tuesday of next week.
Chairman Geyer, how much of a pressing issue is it for the State Board to have action for these remaining, 2 items for next week?
Vice Chair Geyer, Member Jordan. So the remaining of the items is the TAC report discussing all of the problematic issues within the A through F plan and the business rules.
Okay.
That report, which would be presented to the board on December 4th, the board would approve certain areas of that report and tell the give TAC direction on what we want you to model, what we want you to potentially change within the 16-17 model in order to finalize A through F letter grades, hopefully at the January meeting. So we really don't have time, unfortunately, to not give a report to the board. That's why I really would like to have another meeting this week if people are available to do so.
Okay.
Just so we can review that report.
Okay.
Director Williams, do we know if the data quality issues and coding issues have been fully resolved? And if we've had access to that? I know we got another email this morning regarding some of that.
So, Vice Chair Geyer, Member Bachna. So from my understanding, the department sent another data set out this morning. I believe that was sent by Caitlin Drake from the department. I do not know offhand what had changed in there. I do know that Member Jordan maybe knows some of the answers because I feel as if I had forwarded some of his questions to the department.
Vice Chairman Geyer and Member Bachman, the file, I had a chance to look at both of them, and they seem to be complete because we know that we were missing some pieces of data in the last data set, and they did include a couple. They did rerun the data so that some of the missing pieces out of the first one were populating, and then also including another field and a category in there that's essential for some of the work that we need to be doing as well.
Thank you.
So, Director Williams.
Vice Chair Geyer, would you like me to see if we can have another meeting this week with this committee to go over the report that needs to be submitted to the board on Monday?
Yes, if it would improve the quality of the tax report to the State Board on December 4th.
That would be great. So board staff will work on scheduling that. Is within the members that are currently here, does anyone have any scheduling conflicts for either Thursday or Friday of this week? Member Halladino, when are you not available on Thursday and Friday?
Let's see, Thursday. After 2 o'clock on Thursday, I'm available. And on Friday, I'm really not available at all. Unless it's going to squeeze it in the morning real quickly. Like 10 to 12 maybe.
Does any other members have any availability after 2 on Thursday?
I'm available.
Thursday afternoon works fine for me.
Yeah, I'm available.
Okay. So I will get in touch with Chair Schlesman, and we will attempt to have a meeting Thursday afternoon after 2 p.m. Maybe we can shoot for 2:30 to help Member Haladino with traffic. Okay. And then I'll have board staff set that agenda, since we will lose quorum with Member Hovanich leaving relatively soon. Okay. I do want to, if it's okay with you, Vice Chair Guyer, to take, we do not have any public comments, and we've already discussed future meeting dates. However, I would like a motion from the committee to take items 2 and 3 and table them for the next TAC meeting.
I'll make a motion to move items 2 and 3 to the next TAC meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay. And then Vice Chair Guyer, if you could please adjourn the meeting.
Yes, do I have an motion to adjourn the meeting?
I move we adjourn the meeting.
And a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned at 4:59.
Thank you.
Thank you.